inaugural virtual coffee chat, and it's so great to see all your smiling faces today. So this morning, we have a couple of objectives that we want to go through with you. Kind of our biggest goal is to just kind of fill you in on what's been happening in the Ravenswood City School District with distance learning. We all know it's been a challenging year, so we're going to talk through some of the challenges as well as some of the success stories that we've had with virtual tutoring. We're going to talk a little bit more about how remote tutoring's worked, what we've learned, what improvements we've seen, and what challenges we still have. And finally, we'll give you an opportunity to ask some questions at the end. So we're going to start by talking with Keri, who's our program director for All Students Matter. And later on, we'll be joined by Rachel Spector. And Rachel's the literacy instructional coach for Cesar, Chavez, Ravenswood Middle School over in East Palo Alto. And then we'll end with the Q&A. So a few housekeeping items. Feel free to turn on your video. It looks like most of you have your videos on, so that's great. And go ahead and stay muted, but if you want during the Q&A portion, you can go ahead and unmute yourself if you have a question. So if you have questions throughout the event, feel free to put them in the chat. To open the chat box, it's on the lower bar on your Zoom screen, and it just says chat. And so feel free to put any questions you want in there. We have Jeanette Kennedy, who's our board chair. She's going to be answering some of those questions real time, and then some of them we'll be answering at the end, like I said, in the Q&A. And then finally, if you want to set your Zoom screen preference to speaker view, then you should be able to see Keri, Rachel, and I as we talk. So that's in the upper right-hand corner of your Zoom screen. So real quick to get started before Keri joins me, can you please open your chat box and tell us what motivated you to become involved with or learn more about All Students Matter? And I'll read a few of the responses. Teachers need help. I love that. That is so true. This has been such a challenging year for teachers. Helping students with no volunteers in schools, most definitely. The educational inequity. Yeah, we've heard that a lot, and I'm sure everybody's been reading about that in the news. It's crazy, the difference between, you know, the East Palo Alto side of town versus the west side of town. Helping students who need a lot of help. Much better spent helping kids in Ravenswood than over in Palo Alto. That is so true. I felt the same way when my kids were in the Menlo Park schools. There's just so much more need. Oh, and I see the comment, was just tutoring right before the coffee, and my students are so willing to learn. I love that. Wonderful. Okay, well, let's get started. So Keri's going to join me now. And so Keri, we've been reading quite a bit about how lower income students have been really disproportionately affected by distance learning, with 89% of the Ravenswood City School District's students classified as low income. How has distance learning affected our district?
Well, Angie, this is proving to be one of the most challenging situations one could imagine. The kindest way I can put it is that the district is really struggling with remote learning. There were already historic and major systemic problems that were just beginning to be addressed as the new superintendent came on board in May of 2019. But now COVID is shining a very bright light on several pre-existing conditions. So I'll go through a few of those with you right now. The first is technology. This has been a weakness for Ravenswood for many years, both in the slow onboarding of technology to the classrooms in the past decade and in the training and support for teachers. There are 3 tech support positions that remain open at Ravenswood. The salary is only $25 an hour. For comparison, a school bus driver in Menlo Park makes $33 an hour. There are union issues and other blockades to Ravenswood Education Foundation being able to supplement this salary to a competitive rate. As a stopgap, the district has reached out to a nonprofit called Street Code. They're not great at tech support. Their mission is really to teach kids coding, but they're trying to help. And then Ravenswood Education Foundation, I'll call them REF from here on out, has offered to hire Neighborhood Tech, which is just a private company, on an hourly basis to avoid union conflicts. And we're pretty optimistic that this offer might be accepted. Then directly affecting the students, Chromebooks were sent home last March to all students, or iPads, that's it for K and 1. But they are now 5 years old, the Chromebooks, and they were really heavily used before they went home. At this point, there's lots of broken chargers. Some of the computers are breaking down. And to swap them out or get them replaced takes much longer than you would expect. We're hearing regular reports of it taking over a week to get a charger replaced or a computer swapped out. A second issue is that the staff is overwhelmed. The Ravenswood staff already worked harder than most before COVID, but now the long hours on Zoom, the stress of remote teaching, the need to quickly learn an entirely new delivery system while simultaneously redesigning a full grade level curriculum is really taking its toll. With the very rapid need to shift to distance learning last spring, many teachers were sort of left trying to fit a square peg into a round hole. There was really no time to be thoughtful and creative in approaching online learning. And then going back to the tech issues that I was just talking about, in general, there really isn't the ability to research, adopt, and learn existing online learning platforms like there might be in a better functioning school district. And then along sort of those same lines, with all of the stress and exhaustion the teachers face, compassion fatigue is happening. So I'll give you two examples, one sort of grave and one minor, but they both have they're both equally consequential. Previously, the teachers had sort of, they were heard reports of verbal or physical abuse. Now they're actually witnessing it live on screen. And so obviously that's traumatic. And then just on a smaller scale, but again, impactful is the difficulty getting materials home. The school bus drivers are doing some drop-offs and most parents do come and pick up their materials. But when you live in a crowded house and you're getting materials for a full week from a couple of different teachers, things get lost. Just think of our own kids bringing home papers from school. From 3 p.m. to 3:30, they got lost at my house, and so now if the art teacher asks the kids to get out their blue piece of paper, you have, 30 kindergarten or first graders scattering to go get the blue piece of paper. Is it in a bag? Where did it go? When it came home? It takes 20 minutes, and then the teachers kind of lost the lesson. So those were kind of the heavy but important things to hear. But I also just want to share a few bright lights. There are some excellent teachers working super hard. They report that they're struggling. They say it's an extremely challenging situation, but we're so glad to have that kind of quality in the district. Ravenswood also does have a very competent and fabulous new superintendent who's working really hard to turn things around. It's not going to happen overnight, but again, we're really glad to have her in place. Ravenswood Education Foundation is very well funded and is ready and waiting to fund programs and needed support as the district's able to bring them in. There are learning hubs, the 49ers Academy, Boys and Girls Club of the Peninsula, East Palo Alto Tutoring and Tennis. They all have created several learning hubs with reliable Wi-Fi and supervised recess time. So far serving only about 100 students. I think there's one more scheduled to open this month. They're not perfect. At least one teacher has said that the hubs are noisy and students are finding it tough to focus on homework, but it is this place with reliable Wi-Fi, and that is a big step up from a lot of households. And then there's us, All Students Matter. We have been a constant for over a decade. Teachers know us and trust us. And then this year we're more robust and better trained than ever. And then just to wrap up on a high note, I wanted to just read you a quote from a volunteer last week. I get a lot of emails. She said, "I'm so jazzed I had to write you all to report that Gonzalo, who's a 2nd grader, and I had a wonderful session. It couldn't have been any better. Would you believe we went from 115 to 240? when given a choice of what to do, he said, "I want to read more books." Every question, every sentence had an exclamation point. So it's
Yeah.
not, there's some good news.
Yes. I absolutely love to hear feedback like that because I know it's been such a challenging year for the district and the teachers as well as our volunteers. So I've heard from a number of teachers that have told me this is the most difficult year of their teaching career, like just crazy. And we've also heard a number of issues where students are having challenges and some of them aren't actually logging into the classroom time, the Zoom classroom. And so that's always really challenging. If they're not getting the curriculum, obviously they're not going to be learning. I recently saw in the news that about 97% of California households actually do have access to broadband at speeds high enough to do some video calls, but it's often still not enough when there's multiple students and adults in the family all trying to access the internet. And we've seen a lot of technology challenges, and I noticed it actually in the chat. One of our volunteers said lots of connectivity issues, and we're seeing that as well with our volunteers. So Keri, you tracked some of the challenges that our volunteers saw with students over the spring and summer when we did our pilot for virtual tutoring. And obviously stable internet was one of the issues we talked about. What are some of the other challenges that volunteers faced over the summer?
Well, we learned a lot from our spring and summer virtual tutoring pilot, and we were super grateful to have that experience on a small scale before ramping up to full K-8 support this fall. So some of the challenges that we experienced over the summer that we by and large corrected now, but you know, they're real challenges. Communicating with families is one. We are lucky to have several bilingual site director that helps us with translation, but even when that translation isn't an issue, many parents have really busy home lives. They may not have or maybe don't respond to email. So we've moved to texting, and texting has really been the way to go. That's worked out really well. A second issue is holding students' attention on Zoom. We've learned to shorten our time frames, have more frequent tutoring sessions. We pick our times much more carefully. We avoid lunchtime. We avoid time that follows students having been on Zoom for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
We ask a lot of interactive questions and keep the students really engaged. And then the final issue was the need for increased communication between teachers and volunteers.
Mm-hmm.
When we're not in the classrooms or the hallways to have those sort of spontaneous conversations. So we have now regularly scheduled monthly meetings between teachers and all their volunteers, both the synchronous volunteers who are working with the teachers during their Zoom classroom time,
Mm-hmm.
and the asynchronous volunteers who work with students outside of Zoom classroom time. And then we encourage the volunteers and the teachers to use a shared Google Sheet where they can record student progress, challenges on a weekly basis, and then provide any feedback on any issues.
Yeah, it's great to have that increased communication with students and teachers and families, because I know that was definitely a challenge with my little guy, Solomon, that I was working with, not having enough feedback from the teacher. So it's really great to have those monthly check-ins. So what are volunteers seeing so far this fall, Keri? Has it changed? Have things improved?
Well, looking at where we are now, we're just 3 weeks into virtual tutoring with all of our synchronous volunteers. Those are the volunteers that are in the Zoom classrooms. And then we're midstream in placing our asynchronous volunteers. So we're still onboarding volunteers this month. Some challenges that are unique to virtual tutoring this fall are technology. You know, we keep going back to this, but it's just a challenge all the way around. I think one of the biggest challenges for our volunteers has been this whole pivot to utilizing Zoom and all of its functions.
Mm-hmm.
I've been super impressed by the dedication and time our volunteers have put into learning how to really fully manipulate the Zoom features. They're accessing a variety of online libraries. They're looking for workarounds when needed, being flexible with and patient with teachers who are actually maybe less adept at Zoom than we are. They're actually doing some coaching for some of their teachers.
Wow.
So that's been great. And then finally, relationships. Another frustration our volunteers have taken in stride really is the difficulty connecting with a child when they're not sitting side by side.
Mhm.
So to address this, some of our volunteers have maintained a tutoring schedule with students that they started working with last spring and summer, and they've asked to follow them into the fall. And that's really strengthened that bond, having that long multi-year relationship.
Mhm.
For volunteers who are new to their students, we've supplied a wide range of icebreakers and quick online games to
Mhm.
encourage sort of general communication and bonding. There's so much research that supports that this bonding and trust is really at the core of students opening themselves up to academic challenges. If you don't have that, you're not going to move forward with a difficult academic situation.
Right.
Relationship building is really something our ASM volunteers do very well. And with all the heaviness of the district's predicament, these bonds are really critical to keeping Ravenswood students engaged in learning. I have to say, I see a lot of email correspondence with 200 volunteers, and I just really continue to be so inspired by the dedication and commitment and heart our volunteers have in
Mhm.
supporting the students with whom they work. It's really quite remarkable, and gives me a lot of faith that there's just, goodness in this world, with all the heaviness that we get, in the media and just real time from the district. It's, this is really an amazing group of people.
I totally agree with you. We have such an amazing group of volunteers, and it's very inspiring. And I do believe that kind of that one-on-one tutoring relationship is the key to helping students catch up and make learning more personal and develop a love for lifelong learning. So we know the district, Keri, I'm going to pivot a little bit here, has been reaching out to families to see how distance learning's been going. What are they hearing from families?
Well, the district received a very clear-eyed view of what is happening in the Ravenswood community. And I really believe meeting these challenges is going to take the full support of the region. Some of the critical issues to address are attendance. It's on the rise, but it remains problematic across the grade levels. And often it's the frustration with poor Wi-Fi that leads to absences.
Yeah.
Crowded and stressful home life. Implicit in this is the insufficient Wi-Fi bandwidth. We've talked a lot about this, but it remains central, of course, with distance learning. Difficulty in a crowded and stressful home, there is difficulty concentrating or prioritizing school. One of our volunteers told us about tutoring a 6th grader last week who had an infant in her arms. She was also babysitting 2 younger siblings, all while trying to do school. As another example, I'll just read you an email from one of our middle school volunteers that we received last week. She said, I again attempted to meet with Eric, who's a 6th grader, via Zoom. And again, it was almost a total failure. I could barely hear him, even though I asked him to turn his volume all the way up and put on earphones. He read me a paragraph. He read about a paragraph of holes in Spanish before going mute. I had to ask several times if he was still there, and he finally typed me the answer. He wrote that people were working in his house, and that's why he had stopped reading. I did reach out to the mother by phone and let her know that the tutoring is not working and that I couldn't hear anything that Eric was saying. She said something about the connection and him having to go outside.
Mm.
So I think that's actually sort of, well, I think it speaks for itself. It's sort of a picture of what's going on. And then a final critical issue, it's really a regional issue, is the homelessness situation. Ravenswood City School District has reported a staggering 42% homelessness rate among its students. The study found homelessness rose by 50% from the 2017-2018 school year to the 2018-2019 school year. And anecdotally, we're hearing that this steep rise is continuing this year. The support that ASM offers students and teachers is viewed as critical by the district, and never more than right now. And our ability to support teachers and boost teacher morale, to connect on a personal level with students and now their families, and to work with students every single week to help them achieve even very small steps in academic growth, which does lead to improvements in self-esteem, has really never been more important.
Yeah, I totally agree. Thank you, Keri. I really appreciate all your insight on what's been happening with the district and our students. It's so difficult for the students in Ravenswood district doing distance learning. And unfortunately, because of the high COVID rates in the community, it actually looks like they'll be one of the last districts in our region to be back in in-person school.
Yeah.
I recently heard from a friend of mine whose children are in the Menlo Park City School districts, and she writes to me, my children are able to go back to school because our district has enough resources. They are splitting all classes in half, revamping the HVAC system, and installing HEPA filters in all the classrooms, ensuring that each classroom has fully operational windows to the outside, providing wagons of playground equipment designated to each 10 to 12 student cohort, no sharing, offering a virtual academy for any student that does not want to come back in person with free devices, testing staff once a week and offering COVID tests to the entire school community, siblings and parents included. She says, I'm so grateful and so reminded of privilege. There's no way many of our neighboring districts can afford to do this. Our system is utterly inequitable. And it's so true. It's so true. So, well, thank you so much, Keri. We are now going to be joined by Rachel Spector. So Rachel's the instructional coach at Cesar Chavez Ravenswood Middle School in East Palo Alto. And we'll hear a little bit more about what's happening at the middle school. So Rachel, welcome.
Hi, good morning.
Good morning. So you've been a teacher for many years. How has this year been different?
Yeah, this year has been a huge, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. This year has been a huge adjustment. Keri really summarized things well. If I were going to speak specifically about for the middle school and our experience in the middle school, it's been hard to say that students are learning. You know, a lot of my job is to see if we're making progress towards our goals, and there's been very slow progress. We've had to condense our curriculum, but really there's no great guide for how to do that. And so teachers are just struggling with what's the most important, what are the most important skills we need to teach while we do have kids with us, and with this very, very limited amount of time. So we're looking at only reaching kids for each subject twice a week for 40 minutes, synchronously, twice a week for 40 minutes. So if you compare that to our primary schools, they're seeing synchronously, I think they're seeing students a lot longer than we are. So for social studies as well, for English as well, each course has about 40 minutes twice a week with students. And one of the biggest struggles we've seen is when we ask kids to do work asynchronously, just reviewing skills we've taught, or even front loading new material, videos, any content really at all, asking kids to read outside of class. It's just not happening at all, or 25% of kids are doing that asynchronous work. So what we have noticed actually is that teachers in the middle school are requesting more synchronous time with students, opposed to the primary. My understanding, talking with the other coaches in the primary divisions, is that teachers are so overwhelmed with the amount of synchronous time and the prep that it takes to get prepared for that, doing that synchronous time well. The primary started off with more synchronous time, and they're going to take that, possibly take some of that away. As we know, it's not great for kids to have so much screen time either. And then the secondary, or the middle school, is actually looking to add synchronous time to just like 10 minutes per class, so that we can have students do some of that asynchronous work practice with us, with our guidance. A lot of it is supporting them through the technology, helping them just get something started, so that they understand there's an expectation beyond showing up for class each day.
Yeah.
That they have other work to continue doing as sort of homework. But currently, we haven't made that adjustment yet. We're looking at what changes we might make for trimester 2. It's been tough actually to get to have these conversations about making adjustments. I've noticed the district struggles a lot with being ready to sort of pivot or be nimble and use feedback from teachers and students and families to actually make adjustments where we realize things are not serving students to quickly be ready to adjust. I think we're finally at a point where, our superintendent is really opening her ears to hearing from teachers, and we're trying to survey families. We're not getting a ton of responsiveness from families to speak up, share what they think is working and not working, and make those changes. So it's hard, right? Seeking feedback sometimes inconsistently, not hearing back from families, not knowing how to make adjustments. So we're kind of, to be honest, at this point, reaching out to teachers and coaches to figure out what we think is best, and hopefully making some adjustments in the next month or so. Yeah.
Wonderful. So we've had, years of experience working with the youngest kids, right? TK through 5th grade. What's different? What should our volunteer tutors be doing differently with the middle school students? Like what are their needs that are a little more unique?
Yeah, I think of the story that Keri just mentioned with Eric. That's a really common experience for middle school kids. By the time they're 12 and 13, they're really embarrassed by, or I don't know if that was just a connectivity issue. I would say, I don't know too much about the situation, Keri, but students sometimes shut down. They get quiet and they turn their camera and their mic off. And if we're asking them to read aloud, especially second language learners, newcomers, the ones that we might be recommending or referring to your program, those are the kids who feel embarrassed and insecure. And so asking them to read aloud is, especially when they don't know you through a screen, right? They're less and less likely as they get older to push through that. And yeah, we have a good handful of newcomers in the middle school that are struggling in that way. I think other differences, just in general, readers in the middle school, I've noticed, haven't had this moment where they've fallen in love with reading. And so there's a lot of this, disconnection from reading, that they dislike reading. They've already decided by the time they get to us that they don't like reading, especially the ones that you might be working with. And so trying to provide the middle school students this really just falling in love with reading moment is really critical. Finding any book that's engaging, exciting. It doesn't necessarily need to have a ton of substance, but action and an engaging plot is something that I always tried to do in the classroom for our kids in Ravenswood, because I felt like they came to me in 6th grade, 7th grade without ever having that experience. And so if I could provide that one thing, that was my goal.
Yeah.
So other middle school challenges, can't think of any. I mean, we're having attendance issues as well. So if I was going to summarize, we've got in the morning time from 9:30 to 11 when kids are in class, there's I would say 25 to 35% absences in the morning. And those are the core classes.
Yeah.
Math, science, English, social studies. And then in the afternoon, where we're asking kids to come in for additional social emotional learning or small group instruction, or even office hours, no one's attending, it's almost at 0. But then those other moments, we're seeing 50 to 80% absences. And those are required classes. So once, it's after lunchtime, students don't realize that they're required to attend classes. And we have been reaching out to families through counselors, asking teachers to make calls themselves, but those attendance rates have stayed really low in the afternoon.
What's your sense? Do you think students are they're so frustrated by technology issues that they're I'm giving up, I'm just not going to log in? Or are they just not enjoying the whole remote experience, which we all know is very difficult? What's your sense of kind of the reason why there's such high absenteeism rates?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of language challenges for kids with who aren't understanding how to use their tech. I would say that's a solid 10 to 15% of kids who just like can't physically do that without someone walking them through it next to them physically. They need a person in their presence to walk them through that. And then I think there's definitely motivation. We've got a lot of kids when we ask students how they're feeling emotionally about, do social emotional check-ins, the things that they're writing back to us and saying, because they don't come off mute to say it out loud necessarily, but they're typing into the chat or they're typing into a Padlet response, things like, I hate this, I'm miserable, I hate online learning. When are we going back? We had a lot of kids just, when are we coming back to school? I want to come back to school, asking and asking to come back. And I think they just might not see the point in, are they motivated by grades? Are they motivated by, if there's not a family member at home encouraging them and telling them that school is important and potentially integrating different types of reward systems for them, like there's really no, unless they're super self-motivated, there's no reason for them to go out of their way and try. So we've got a lot of our kids that are technically failing classes, and there's not a lot that we can do because grades, they're not even necessarily thinking that matters, right? So when you're in school, you work all kinds of incentive systems and motivate kids in different ways. We just have lost all of that. So
Yeah, that's so hard to hear.
mhm.
Have you seen, I know it's so sad to hear about how challenging the situation is, but have you seen any success stories or silver linings with distance learning? Is there anything that's going well?
Yeah, oh, definitely. Especially in our social studies classrooms, we've done this unit. I'll just share a little bit about it. We've done a unit, it's a taking action unit, kind of like a project-based learning unit related to social justice issues. And so we've seen higher rates of participation in the social studies courses that are, we're discussing Black Lives Matter, civil rights history of the United States, and different issues that are, voter suppression issues. Now we've seen kids engage more with teachers and have discussions. We had like 12 different speakers from the community come in last week in social studies classes, including, board members. Gina Sudaria visited classrooms. We had people from Street Code and, different community organizations. The idea being that we would interview these people about challenges that they find that they're connected to, social justice issues that they feel motivated by. And really, we tried to flip it and make it about how they're inspired, what inspires them. And so the kids got to hear from a lot of leaders in the community about what they're inspired by. And so I think the next step, hopefully, and possibly maybe you all would be interested in thinking with us about how to use some funding to take action to solve some problems that we find that we're passionate about in our community. So if literacy is a challenge for people, our community, then we can create a literacy project, and there's funding for that. If, some students are feeling passionate about, the specific Latino, issues for the Latino community or for the Black community, they can create different projects, either awareness campaigns or education campaigns or a school club, or really anything is possible. And so maybe we can collaborate on a literacy project too.
Oh, I love that. That's such a great idea. Yeah, we definitely should talk about that.
Yeah, so kids are getting excited about that, and it's knowing that kids want to come back to school and be with us. That is always good to hear, that they're still they want to return to school. They're not completely checked out. They want to be together. They're social.
Yes.
We'll get there eventually.
Yeah. Hopefully sooner rather than later. But,
Mhm.
well, thank you so much, Rachel. We're out of time, but we did want to give everyone an opportunity to ask questions. So if you want to switch back to gallery view where you can see everybody and we'll see you, and you can either raise your hand, or if you have a question, you can put it in the chat and I can read it either way. Or if you want to, oh, we've got a question here. So from Vidya, even when the kids get back to school, will ASM volunteers be allowed to tutor in person? So I can respond to that. So actually, we have committed to being remote for the entire school year, because the issue is going to be, even when Ravenswood does open up, which will probably be sometime in second semester, they're still going to have to follow really structured ratios of student to staff and social distancing, and just keep the number of people down in the classrooms. So we're actually going to stay remote for this entire school year. And very likely the district won't be allowing in-person volunteering anyway. I mean, it's kind of the sense that we've heard. Okay, other questions?
Yeah, we had 2 questions in the chat earlier, so they're way up higher, so I'll alert you to them. We had a couple of people asking actually about how they can help. I think one's a volunteer, one's not a volunteer, so maybe there's different things both volunteers and other community members might do that you could speak to. Yes,
most definitely. So we are going to have a new cohort of volunteers start in January. So we already have a bunch on the waiting list, and we're hoping to get more volunteer slots by then. And we'll have a whole nother set of trainings and orientations with teachers. So if you're not volunteering yet and you'd like to, most definitely go to our website, sign up. We'd love to have more volunteers. The need is great this year, as you've heard. Also, we, of course, always love it when people tell their friends about us. So if you've got some friends that are interested in volunteering in Ravenswood and supporting the work we do, please let us know. That would be great, or send them to our website as well. And then also, you know, we're a nonprofit, we're small, we're grassroots, so we always are looking for funding. So if educational equity kind of hits a nerve with you and you want to work to getting more equitable educational experiences in the area, we welcome you to join us. We're doing an annual campaign right now, so we welcome you to join us on that. And I think Jeanette put a link to a couple of things, getting involved and our campaign in the chat. So other questions out there?
Are any of the kids homeless?
Rachel, do you want to speak to that?
I believe so. Our numbers, I'm not completely sure of right now, but I know they've been relatively small in the past. Maybe Angie, or I'm sorry, Keri.
Yeah, I mean, the district is reporting 42% of students this year have housing insecurity. You know, I mean, there's sort of this gray area between housing insecurity and sleeping on a sidewalk. I don't think we have too many on a sidewalk, but there are many, many families that have doubled and tripled up in already small housing situations. A lot of our students are in shelters. So, I mean, depending on, you know, the way you're going to view homelessness or housing insecurity, the housing insecurity term comes, I'll just back up for a second. That is I think Carolyn and Angie can jump in. I think it's a county defined term where they, on a day and time, they ask families, do you know where you'll be sleeping 30 days from now? And if the answer is no, then they're deemed housing insecure. So that's sort of that term. But, you know, it's 42% of the students that are housing insecure. So in terms of stress levels and temporary conditions and constantly changing conditions, that's very real for nearly half of the students in the district.
I had a question earlier that got missed somewhere, but since kids are really missing out on the social element of school, and that's keeping them pretty motivated, I was wondering if we could do pair sessions, like 2 kids per session so that, and the kids could nominate their friends or whoever they wanted to study with. Or the teacher could do it so that the kids would have some socialization during the asynchronous sessions as well.
Yeah, that's an interesting idea. We hadn't thought about doing the asynchronous sections in pairs, but it's certainly something we can look into. I think the challenge would be is, you want to make sure the students are kind of at the same level, in terms of literacy, especially. So, but it's definitely, that's a good idea. We'll look into that, Vidya.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's certainly something we can offer to the teachers. I think it's a great idea.
So let's see, Kate had a question, Keri, what types of online reading apps are we utilizing for asynchronous tutoring sessions? Do you want to talk to that?
Sure. So the teachers, we just, Kate, I know you're not an ASM volunteer, just a friend of mine, but so the teachers really direct our curriculum. So we use whatever the classroom is using. Typically it's called Epic Books, or there's another program called Raz Kids. The middle school and some of the other classes sometimes have a hard copy that the teachers will, in one form or another, get to our volunteers. So, and I know some of our volunteers are actually getting a little resourceful and going into the library system and getting some books. But in general, to answer your question, we're using the platforms that the teachers are using, which is Epic and Raz.
Thank you, Keri. I really appreciate it. Rachel, I think you're doing an amazing job. I think All Students Matter is an incredible organization. I just want to commend, Jeanette Kennedy invited me to participate today, and I read through the material. I'm just so impressed by what you guys have been able to achieve, especially in this incredibly unprecedented time, in history. And I guess I have a question for you, Rachel, based on what you're talking about, how and what other people have mentioned about, the more well-funded school districts. Is there any opportunity for the teachers at the Ravenswood district to maybe consult or, have Zoom meetings, sharing, information sessions to get insights from what tools they're using to engage students? And then secondly, I'm wondering whether you guys had mentioned that there are like learning pods by outside of school organizations. Is it possible to partner with maybe the business community, companies like Facebook, or people who have unutilized commercial office space that's going begging right now, and maybe utilize those for in-school, school day learning pods, so the kids can get out of their homes where they have poor Wi-Fi and lots of distractions, and maybe in learning pod groups. I've heard, like in San Francisco, the Y opened up to have the ability to get schools, kids together out of their homes and somewhere where they could concentrate and learn. Do you think there's any possibility of following up with those options?
Yeah, so your first question was around connecting with other schools nearby to sort of exchange ideas. Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Teachers.
It's actually something I've asked our district office personnel about, is what are, nearby school districts doing? How can we figure out what they're doing in terms of their schedule that's working? We have this perspective that our needs are so unique that there's some benefit to that. And then there's other challenges that, having a supportive family structure at home and a space where you can concentrate, it's just really tough. We are receiving really great training. So I think in terms of tech platforms, I came from one of the most best schools in Brazil right before this, where we were almost purely asynchronous and doing some really great work. There's not much more that I can think of that we're missing in terms of training. We are at the point where teachers have enough exposure to all these different tech platforms and training. It's just a matter of like kids not showing up and incentives and motivation. But we have,
I think that's what led me to the second part of that, is creating an environment where they can get out of their homes and maybe go to a learning pod during the school day, having their class in a distanced kind of, socially distanced, safe way in a learning pod, maybe unutilized office space where a teacher could be, or I don't know. Are there any options that?
Again, I believe that my understanding is the way learning pods are working is it's sort of like whoever signs up, not necessarily teachers. Essentially what's happening with ASM is ideally teachers would refer the kids that we think are highest need, but then those kids are not showing up, right? And so my understanding is that the families who are active and involved are the ones who are signing up and taking their kids who can transport them or get them there. And so you're just seeing that gap widen of the kids who need the most support are not getting that. So
Do you think there's a-
logistically, I don't know the solution there.
Yeah. Kate, I have been in touch with the Boys and Girls Club, and they need an in-person tutor in their hubs. And they are taking the kids who probably, as Rachel just said, are the ones that can transport it there. Supposedly the neediest kids for whom home learning just wasn't working out. And those kids are at the Boys and Girls Club, and they have desks and they're socially distanced and they have plexiglass. So they are in need of some help, but you have to go in person inside. And I don't know if they met their needs or not. And there's so many big problems. I'm not sure if that's not the only solution, but that's one way you can help.
Yeah, the hubs have been super successful from what we've heard, or, fairly successful, but it's a small group of kids. It's not that many yet. The last number we heard was right around 100. I don't know, Carolyn Bauscher, if you've got any new numbers, if you want to add to that.
Hi, I'm Carolyn Bauscher. I'm one of the Ravenswood Education Foundation board members. And the last I heard, I thought we were more like 130 on the hubs. Like, I think we just opened a new hub actually over at Belhaven. And in terms, Kate, of your comment, it's not that we're missing the space to hold the hubs. It's that the district is overwhelmed with distance learning and can't take on the hubs themselves. So Ravenswood Education Foundation actually facilitated the whole hub system. And we pulled together all community partners that we know and helped with a little bit of funding, but it's not really as much about funding and space. It's more about community partners willing to do this work. So the district surveyed a bunch of families and all the families, and originally had about 500 kids they thought were interested in hubs. But when push comes to shove, it looks like 200 are very interested, and we're serving around 130. And the way they prioritized it was what Rachel said, to take the most needy kids first and do it by family. So we're actually, that's been a bright light. I think the hubs have been a bright light. And, occasionally there's extra noise in the room. You can imagine an empty classroom, with no carpet or anything, and then 10 kids trying to talk at the same time in the classroom. It can be a little noisy, but other than the noise, I think it's been safe. And for parents who are working, it's an invaluable tool.
Yeah.
Wow.
And is it actually during the school day that the kids are able to go who are able to make it there?
Yes.
That's fantastic.
Wow.
Yeah, thanks, Carolyn. That's a great update. Yeah, Judith, did you have a question there?
Yes. My student has, as I'm sure most of them do, little siblings running around. And there is an older boy. Has there been any effort to engage siblings both in the program? Say there's a middle school brother or sister along. I could see that being such a good link for, rather than trying to get some other student the same age, but wouldn't it be wonderful to have both of them in the program? And then, I know I'm an idealist, but I could just, because this brother's around and he talks to him and I know him now, and could you keep your voice down a little bit, please? And, what do you think about, trying to engage him? It's just an idea. Is that logistically too big of a deal? And do we have siblings in the program?
And you're talking about for tutoring?
Yes.
Specifically for tutoring?
Or even asking the older one to help the younger one.
Mm-hmm. So I think we've had some of those relationships develop organically. Because I know the little guy I tutored in the spring and then into the beginning of the summer, his sibling actually started attending our sessions because he wanted to hear the book too. And it was a younger sibling. So, I mean, I think we do have a little bit of that happening organically, but we don't have a formal kind of sibling tutoring relationship. I think part of the issue is they're often at very different reading levels. But it's definitely something we could think about if there's a need out there. I might be
Is that okay? I mean, I'm not overstepping the boundaries if I talk to him and say, you know, there was an issue with the little brother scribbling all over Gonzalo's pad, and, you know, can you help him find a place he can stick this in? And sometimes, because I taught middle school for years, the older one needs it, but doesn't want to admit it, and might even get engaged in hearing me read to, I don't know, just some ideas there.
I think those are some great ideas, Judith. And I love the buddy system with an older student who may or may not be more capable working with the younger, and siblings are just housemates. It makes a lot of sense. I think that's something we could look into. Just to answer your question a little bit more, Angie sort of talked about some organic pairings showing up, but we do have a lot of parents who watch us with, I won't say a lot, but we have a decent amount of parents who watch us with one student of theirs and then write in and say, hey, I've got like 2 kindergartners, can you take them as well? And so we certainly take parent requests. So anytime a parent communicates either through a teacher or directly to us asking for additional help for other kids in the family, we absolutely, yes, we always do that. And we have a couple of families that are doing that now.
Dana in the chat is saying, I love your idea, Ashley. Could we meet with the kids after school for in-person reading outside? Yeah, we had asked at one point if the district was going to do any type of outside group learning. I think right now, because the COVID rates are so high, they're not really allowed to bring students back at all, except for this hub situation. But I mean, certainly we're in California, and that is a potential option that we can bring up. Because I mean, it definitely helps keep the COVID rates down.
Angie, Ashley's original question in chat had been a bit around how the book club was so successful in the 5th grade, and might that model work and motivate middle school students? So there's a question around whether we're looking at that.
Oh, got it. Thank you. I didn't see the original question. So the jury is still out on whether or not we're going to be able to do the book club. We loved that program. It was such a successful program. It was, for those of you not familiar with it, we had 5th grade mentoring book clubs for the last couple of years, where we had a group of 4 students all reading at about grade level that had some social emotional challenges, and they were paired with an All Students Matter volunteer. And they met once a week, and they read a book about an immigrant child moving to the United States and kind of some of the issues she had, you know, adopting the new country and meeting people and making friends. And part of that program was the students would write in a journal and talk about, you know, their feelings and maybe relating those, the character and the story to their own life. And it was a fabulous program. And unfortunately, when COVID hit in March, we had to abruptly stop our book clubs. And we're hoping to be able to start them back up this year, even though it would be remote. And Ashley, you're asking if we might be able to do it outside. That is certainly something we can ask the district. It may be possible in the spring. We would love to do anything we can to restart these book clubs, because the students, the teachers, and the volunteers actually thought it was a really, really great vehicle for reaching students. And we had a lot of success and great feedback from it. So we will definitely look into that. But right now the jury's out if we'll be able to do it or not. The issue with doing it virtually is that the students are often talking about challenges in their own lives. And now with them all being at home, they're not going to be able to freely talk about some of the trauma and challenges that they were able to talk about in their small groups on site. So we'll continue to research that and get information out about the book clubs and some of our upcoming newsletters. So any other questions out there?
I
Just one-
posted one. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. No, forgive me. I was just wondering whether you've utilized the population of college students to help with like tech and, you know, any kind of computer issues. I know you mentioned that you don't pay a whole lot for tech support, but I thought, you know, what a great opportunity for college students at Stanford or in the local community to be able to do something for the community as well as make money.
I can talk about working with Stanford students. They're great kids. They're not as responsive to requests as you might imagine. We do have 3 Stanford students, 2 graduate students and 1 undergrad who have signed up to volunteer with us. But their schedules change. You know, Stanford is on the quarter system and their schedules change pretty quickly. So it is difficult for them to commit to a year of volunteering when their schedule's shifting all the time. We're working with them because we really want to keep them. But historically, we have not been able to pair with Stanford students at all. And
For tech support.
even for tech support, yeah, I mean, that I haven't, I mean, that would actually be an interesting question for district, or maybe Carolyn knows, but yeah, go ahead, Carolyn.
So 2 things, if you have kids, and I know, Kate, I know you have a very technically able boy. I don't know about your daughter, because I don't know her as well, but we take tech volunteers at REF, and we have used big groups of 11 to 14 teenagers coming over and helping us, you know, with various projects all summer long. And right now Stanford's closed, so it's online. But Stanford does have a connection with Street Code, and Street Code is helping with tech support. They were approved on Thursday night at the school board meeting. So there are some Stanford students who volunteer through Street Code who will be helping with tech support. And we have some on our list for REF to help with projects. But the tech department is a union department, and that's part of the problem. Or it's part of the impediment to fixing all this, but it's not their fault or anything. It's that they're just poorly paid, and there's a lot of, it's not a quick fix. It's not a simple answer. That's why we're working on this neighborhood tech where we can pay hourly and not have them be union workers and not have them be students. But we're trying a lot of things. We're not going to give up until we find something that'll work.
Dana had a question too, I think, right? Dana, you're on mute.
Dana, I think you're on mute.
Sorry, I think Jeanette answered it. I was asking if the playgrounds were open yet, as a way to go out and perhaps go with a book and sit there and maybe see one of your students and read to them. If the playgrounds are closed at the schools, are there public playgrounds closed as well?
The Menlo Park playgrounds had been closed, but they're open now. And there are a couple playgrounds over there on the Menlo Park side. But Palo Alto, the last time I was in East Palo Alto, they were all closed.
Yeah, unfortunately, the last numbers we heard on the COVID positivity rates in East Palo Alto were close to 15%. So that's the issue. There's a huge difference between Palo Alto and Menlo Park on the positivity rates in East Palo Alto. And not surprising, right? That's where a lot of essential workers live, and they have a lot of high density housing situations, multiple families living together. And that's why in-person school is going to be so delayed for starting back up over there, which is so sad because these are the kids that, of course, need it the most. So it's just a perfect storm, unfortunately.
Yeah.
So any other questions?
I'm
Comments?
thinking one of the things, since my kid is a real sport guy, and he wants to know everything about every ball that's ever been made. So I'm thinking that his brother could take him to go out and do some of these things that are in the book. And that's perfectly okay, right? Or do I have to get parent permission to even suggest that? You know what I'm asking?
Yeah, I'm gonna let Rachel answer that one.
Well, I think Rachel signed
Did you
off.
lose her?
Yeah, she had to go.
Then I would just, I think that's a quick text to the teacher. Just, I don't want to speak for the district.
Okay.
But gosh, it sounds like a great idea. And I think it just is a perfunctory, like just, just getting the thumbs up.
And the other part of that is I found some books from the library, but how do we get books for the kid to have? Can we do that? I mean, do they have library access to libraries? And I don't know if the parent will follow up, but how do we get books in their hand other than online and Raz Kids? And there's such dippy, I mean, I love the program, but they're really dippy books. So,
Yeah, I know. Yeah,
it's okay. They have the skills, but I'm just
right.
asking, or is this a question for another?
Well, I'll add a little bit on that. At least at Bellhaven, and we haven't done it yet at Castano, but because the teachers are sending materials home with the students about every 3 to 4 weeks, that's an opportunity for them to get more books. So the teachers are sending books home at all the campuses, as far as I've heard. And then we've been in touch with some other All Students Matter volunteers who have some donated books that are being made available to the teachers, so that when the teachers put those bags together for each student, they have a supply of additional books for the student to have in their home library. So we've done it already at Bellhaven. One of our volunteers did that already, and we've got plans to take a look at not only doing it there again, but also at the other couple of elementary school campuses. We don't have plans yet for middle school, but we're looking at that. We just didn't have a set of donated books for that. We gave those away last year to the middle school. So.
But just to add on to what Jeanette said, all campuses have materials pickups every 2 weeks. So you could go and drop something off at the office. You're not allowed to be on campus, but you could drop it off at the office. They have, if they'll let you, they probably will. They'll probably let you put the books in the teacher's mail slot, and then just tell the teacher, I dropped off 2 books for Johnny. And then at the next materials pickup, could you please put that in Johnny's bag? And I think that would work really well.
I had a neighbor who used to be a first grade teacher at the Peninsula School, who has been collecting books and donating them to offices, doctors' offices, everywhere. But this year she's not allowed to. And she called REF and she called the school district, and they said they cannot accept books because of COVID. And she is willing to totally clean them and bring them to wherever. I didn't think of ASM at that point to see if ASM would be able to utilize her books.
Yeah, so Dana, this is Jeanette, why don't I email you offline and let's work on that, because in the past we've partnered with RAF to be sort of the volunteer organization in the district who can handle sorting the donated books and getting them to the children, because the school district, even in a good year with no COVID, doesn't usually have the resources to do all that sorting and distribution. And we have set up free book fairs, and we have been working, as I mentioned, right, getting books in the hands of kids already. Now those books, so we work with the principals on their COVID, I think, policies and how to handle that. So why don't we work offline? And I would absolutely love to get connected with your neighbor.
Jeanette, would you loop me into that as well? I have about a ton of books, middle school, all the way to high school, as well as a bunch of SAT, ACT prep books that I would love to donate, to kids who could use them.
Sure. I have a bunch in my garage, but I'm sure I can fit more.
Okay.
Thanks, Kate, and thanks, Dana.
All right, I think we are at 11:06, so I think we are going to sign off. But thank you so much for staying to the bitter end and for all your comments and questions. It was really great to have you all, and it was just a nice conversation. So I really appreciate having you all join us today. So take care, and you volunteers and community members, keep up the great work.
Great job, you guys.
Thanks,
Thank you.
everybody.
Thank you.
Fun.
Bye.
Great meeting.
Bye.
I guess we can stop the recording now too.